The Department of Homeland Security's improvements in the best places to work ratings come, in part, thanks to one of the department's bigger component agencies. That would be the Transportation Security Administration. TSA's recent pay increase and expanded bargaining rights are probably the reason for the more than 12-point score improvement the agency saw in 2023. Now TSA is looking for more long-term solutions to its historic workforce challenges. Federal News Network's Drew Friedman got more from TSA Chief Human Capital Officer Jason Nelson.
TSA is a newer agency, been around about 22, coming up on 23 years. Stood up very, very quickly. In the rush to stand up an emergency agency, you don't get to do things, slowly. So a lot of our pay system and a lot of things that were set up were just done to get the security in place for the transportation sector. Over time, we started to realize that as you mature as an agency, it's important to start to engage with your workforce. Listen to the things that people are saying and need in order for us to then mature into an organization that people want to work for. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear through the employee viewpoint survey, other surveys we do, pulse surveys, focus groups, and the way to engage really was about the fact that we were not paying our staff at the same levels as other federal agencies. It's just the way it happened over time. And as inflation went, as things moved, we were really starting to compete with fast food places, warehouses, big box stores. When really this is more of a career is what we're intending for. So staff has been telling us this for a long time. And with that, our administrator and the senior leadership team took that very, very seriously and started working with Congress a number of years ago to start looking at, if you have an agency like ours that's so specific and unique with its own authorities, how can you then look at the rest of the government and take the best practices in pay and retention and other things? And lo and behold, over the time, it worked out in our latest compensation plan, which went live about a year ago now, in July of last year, which did that. It gave us the ability to match the GS tables across the board. So we now had the ability to pay people equally and equitably as they would do another agency. So a lot of our staff would walk across the hall, go to another agency, because we couldn't pay as well. And what that led to was an interesting piece too, is the other half to that was the conversation about careers as opposed to jobs. So we used to post our jobs on USA Jobs, but like an hourly rate. We used to cycle a lot of people out. They come in at the GS5 equivalent in the federal workforce, and they would just staff would rotate through, go to other agencies, or outright resign and take other jobs. So we've heard from the staff very, very clearly, in order to make it a career, it's more about just base pay. It's about advancement. And then we put in career ladders to let people in place not have to compete other than themselves to move up in their first 3 years. And that was what we put in a year ago. It took many, many years of planning and, of course, budgeting. But that all came from the feedback from our employees, the ones that left, the ones that were staying. And also we have, many, many people who stayed within TSA working up through the ranks all the way to the executive level. And they gave us feedback as well of it was really hard in the beginning, really hard to be a single parent and to work overnights and get paid $15 an hour. And so this is a long time in the making.
It's just been in place for about a year now, as you mentioned. What sort of reaction or effects have you seen that having more long-term for TSA employees?
The interesting part that we're really celebrating right now is our attrition or separation rate is about half of what it was pre the new pay plan, which is unbelievable. I mean, to go down and cut your losses by half is really something else. But that's, of course, a honeymoon phase. As well, everyone is excited. I'm excited. But as a human capital officer, I'm also have to be realistic and realize we can celebrate this for a year. But what's going to be the next thing? Because, money, inflation, costs go up, our health insurance goes up, costs of food and everything, housing. It's not going to last forever. So what's the next thing to do? So we don't expect our retention rates to stay like that. We're in a honeymoon phase. It's going to level off to the rest of the government, around 10, 11%. And we're below that right now, which is exciting because we were up over 20% before this. So that's the part that's exciting right now. But, what I'm working on right now with the rest of my staff is what's the next thing that we can take care of our employees. And we're using our latest employee viewpoint survey and others to start to look at. And again, it falls into that career area that we're very, very new in. So that's going to be our next pay, as we call it, to make people want to stay and work here.
Can you describe a little bit more how that career ladder works for employees? And is that something that you're working on adjusting more as time goes on too?
75% of our workforce or so are our frontline officers that you see in the blue shirts. They're the ones that were impacted the most by the pay and the career ladder that we put in. Then the other 25 or so percent of our workforce, we're looking at similar things. We're focusing on the front line right now is really the bulk of what we do. And in the front line, we put in this when you come in, we have a pay banding system here. So it's a DEF, which is equivalent to a GS5, 7, and 9. And what that means is that before, when you came in, you'd start at this GS5 level and you'd have to wait, for an opening, wait for a promotion, someone to leave, which is traditional in the government. This career ladder, so as long as you have minimally successful performance and no real conduct, each year in your first 3 years, you can be promoted in place. So you can go from that D to E to F, or the 5 to 7 to 9. And you can see, knowing GS tables are published and the way we match them, you can see what your salary would look like over the next couple of years. And it's pretty predictable, and if not more, when we get these cost of living increases in January. And so that piece was the first ever. So now people are saying, this is incredible. So I can start here. I might make a little bit less than another job I'm being offered, but my God, goodness, in 2 years now, I might be up 50, 60%. I'm not going to get that with competitors outside of the government. And interesting enough, what our local airport leadership is doing is they're making posters and flyers and putting it up around in recruitment events to say, here's your salary tomorrow when you start. Here's what it'll be like in 3 years. And it's pretty spectacular, especially most of our people. We hire people out of high school, people coming out of the military. College degrees aren't required. Many of them have it. A lot of people are coming out of restaurants and the fast food industries looking for a career. It's really exciting to show that stability in their life.
I did a little bit of a deep dive into some of the best places to work results for TSA, and just comparing some of the more granular areas that the series looks at. So, for example, I noticed that TSA compared to some other DHS subcomponents scores, even though overall the score is trending upward, there were some areas like diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, work-life balance, employee input. Those are areas where TSA seems to be still struggling a little bit in their scores. Are those areas that you're focusing on, or are there ways that you're kind of targeting further improvements based on some of those results?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I mentioned about the honeymoon phase with the pay, that we can't just rely on that forever. I mean, it's not realistic. So we are doing, and actually, interesting enough, when we do our deep dive, when we get the employee viewpoint survey results, we have a requirement that all of our locations have an action plan that's due. And we originally did it on an annual cycle. We just moved it to 2 years because we realized you get the results, and then like a month later, you get the survey again, and there's no real time to take any action. So we went to a 2-year cycle so that we're looking at taking the results and where the areas to improve by location. Because if you look at it across the agency, you can see some trends in some of the numbers as a whole. But we start to dig in, we realize we have best practices in some places, and in some places that need improvement that average out to the aggregate scores that you see. So we're starting to get those plans, and so people can focus on the areas specific to their location that need improvement. And you do see some overlap, of course. I mean, we have one of the big issues that we saw that came up was about unable to hire or retain people in remote work areas. Because, we have every airport that's federalized, we have to staff, including, Nome, Alaska, Adak, Alaska, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Key West, Florida, the northern islands of Hawaii. Their FVD scores are going to look very different than the rest. So it might not be a diversity and inclusion issue there, which typically it isn't in a lot of our remote locations. The people tend to really do reflect the population that they're serving. Where we had problems was more about just getting people to have a house. There's no place to live. And they're like, that things wouldn't show on a survey. So we actually took a trip up to Alaska last year and took a look around and said, there really is nowhere to live. Even if we pay people double, they just can't get any housing. So in those areas, we're focusing on how do we partner with other agencies, partner with DOD, possibly look at acquiring some facilities or things, and looking at unused barrack space. And we're partnering now with DOD and the rest of DHS to see if we can work together to get people some comfortable housing at a reasonable price as opposed to something else. Whereas we do have some locations where you would see some equitable and inclusion issues.